Well, I was visiting a girlfriend in around 1980 in Florida. My grandmom just died and gave me some money, and I took the train down, and she wasn't there, my girlfriend. So I'm walking around. I had a lot of time. I'm walking around on this campus, and it was I can't remember the name of the school, but I think it was near Miami and Fort Lauderdale, some old Ivy League campus. And there's this guy carrying about 12 or 15 books with a cast on his arm, and he's walking, and there's about 5 or 6 students, college students walking, and he kind of walks by me, and he drops the books, and I saw him looking back, and there was this beautiful blonde-haired woman walking, and he kind of dropped them just as she walked by, and she offered to carry the books for him, and he said, oh, that would be really great, and they're talking and so friendly. But I got this really horrible feeling, and when they got out of earshot, I went over to the college students that had been walking in front of him. I said, I got a really horrible feeling about this guy. What do you think? And they says, nah, that happens all the time, that kind of stuff. So then I went after him, and he has her putting the books in this old Volkswagen, and he whacks her on the head, and it was like, I'm like about 20 feet away. I said, hey, what are you doing? And he said, oh, that's my girlfriend. Oh, she's been drinking. I said, she's not your girlfriend. I said, man, well, you hit her on the head. And he says, I got a gun in the car. If you look at my license plate, I'll shoot you. And so I backed off, and he gets in the car, drives off after pushing the girl. And one thing, he had the front seat removed. That's something I remember real clearly. So I walked over, asked the people where security was. I went and told them. First thing they say is, did you get the license number? I said I couldn't. He threatened to shoot me, but I described the old Volkswagen really clearly, and they said, well, we don't know what we can do. So that's happened. And then later that day, I went to a nude beach, and I'm sitting on a nude beach, and there's a lot of sand dunes, and I was sitting next to this woman who I had just met, and we're all naked, and this guy comes over and asks her if she wants to do some cocaine or something. And he looks at me, and I looked at him, and I didn't recognize him. And when he walks away, I says, wow, I'm really glad you didn't go with him. I got a really sick feeling from this guy. And then as soon as I said that, I didn't say it loud. I hear somebody talking over the dune, which was pretty high, saying, do you think he recognized you?
Well, gosh, that's an amazing story. I would say I was with you right up until meeting Ted Bundy nude, and maybe that's where you lost me a little bit on that. But we'll just let that add to the history of Ted Bundy. Gordon in Plant City, Florida, on a wild card line on Coast to Coast. Gordon?
Well, thanks for taking my call, Ian. Talking about bizarre, I live in Lakeland, Florida. And I'm sorry, I used to live in Lakeland, Florida. I'm in Plant City now. I just moved over upon the death of my father. And the police there are more corrupt. You can Google the Lakeland, Florida police corruption. They've been blocking telephones, and they claim that they were not blocking them for 911, which, of course, it would be illegal anyhow. But if you Google Lakeland, Florida police call blocking, you can find out that there has been a little bit of coverage. But the big places are afraid to cover it. And I emailed Tommy and George more definitive proof of this. I posted on my website, but I'm not going to give it out because I don't have permission. But I gave my vow before God that I would break the story with you guys. Now, you might wonder why the police were blocking people's calls. I mean, that's bizarre. It's illegal. You could put lives in danger. And we found out later that they said, oh, we're not blocking 911, just regular calls. Of course, it's a due process issue because they block a call without going through a court process. And secondly, it's a redress issue. You can't redress your government. And third, it puts lives in danger. It's been documented with documentation from the phone company. There were witnesses that were interviewed. I have a camcorder, and I aimed it at some telephones. And I would love to share it with you if I ever get permission, where you aim the camcorder at the telephones, and this phone cannot call, and this one can call.
Well, hang on. Take a breath, man. I did what you told me to do, and I searched just for what you told me to search, and so far the only thing that comes up, I think, is your website. So I don't see it. What's the other? Who else covered this in the news? So you can help me out with this.
When I say other, I mean I have a YouTube mirror as well as a regular mirror.
So you're the one covering this. You're the only one covering
I have a
this.
YouTube mirror and I have a regular website.
Okay, well, pause for a second. Wait. But you wait. No, hang on. No, I'm not going to do this where you just keep on talking as fast as you can talk. I'm asking you a question. So I don't see any evidence of this accusation. And it's important to me that we not falsely accuse somebody. I have that right to demand that if we're going to talk about an entity like the Lakeland Police Department, that there's got to be some proof of what you're talking about. And you say, go Google it, nothing comes up. So, and the only thing that you're saying comes up is coming up through you. So, I will ask you, what is it that happened to you, and what are you so mad about?
Well, what happened was I was trying to report some perjury. The police wrote something in a report. They claimed the dispatcher told me to stay out of this area, and it didn't happen. They got upset about it, and the internal affairs started getting real irate. Well, I want to talk to the police chief, and I called and said, I want to talk to the police chief. And the dispatcher said, no, you have to talk to internal affairs. And I said, I don't feel comfortable talking to him. They would likely view this as harassing phone calls. Now, granted, that's not a justification to block the phone, but I'm saying I didn't want to talk to him, but she said to. So she transferred me to them, and I left a message about my concerns. And okay. I didn't make any harassing phone calls.
We're gonna pause again for a second. So this is basically a personal beef you're having with the Lakeland Police Department.
Well, it happened to other people. My father, if you listen to the interview, you found my website, you listened to the interview that my father and several
okay.
other people encountered the same thing.
All right. Well, then I'll pause and I'll do that. I can't do it now, so we'll just say thank you for now, and I will at some point I'll do that. In my memory, I thought I did this before. Maybe it was another caller, but I'm having kind of a flashback that this was something I did one other time. And I just think it's important that we be fair and that you not drag us into some thing just because we picked up the phone that suddenly we're responsible for besmirching the good name of the Lakeland Police Department if they haven't, in fact, done this thing, which you're saying they do all the time. So we'll leave it there on whether or not there's any documentation or damning proof, as you might suggest. Fair enough? So I will listen to it after I get off the air. Let's go to the wild card line. Is it David in Florida that knew something about this, the supposed shame of Abraham Lincoln? David?
Yes, hi. Yes, David from Dade City, Florida. There's an old conspiracy, just word of mouth thing. I don't think there's anything been written about it, that Lincoln was mulatto, that his father had relations with slaves and sort, and that's one of the reasons he never really publicly attributed anything to his parents or really come out about that. And that was like behind the whole slavery issue, why he was against that, racism and everything like that. Well, basically, he was the first black president.
See, I've never heard that about Lincoln. I've heard that about other presidents, and indeed, it's difficult to find a lot of information about Dwight Eisenhower's. I believe it's his maternal grandmother. That was what they would call at the time a yellow rose of Texas. And I've looked into that a little bit, and actually, I find that there has been quite a bit written about whether how much of Dwight. Was he aware of being coming from at least some part black descent? Thanks, David, and I'll ask Charles on that. Had you heard anything about that, Charles?
No, I have not. It's very interesting, but I think one would be foolish, even if one were to resurrect the spirit of Carl Sandburg, to make any definitive statements on this issue, because the immense literature on Lincoln may include something on these lines, but I have not come across it.
I feel that you basically threw very, very valuable, credible alternative information into a trinket category with all these other infomercials.
No, I didn't. Look, I'm not going to. I really don't want to go backward, and I'm disappointed that this is our first call because I'm afraid this is what this is going to turn into. I go to health food stores all the time. I eat vitamins. I do everything. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't make the infomercials, They do. And in the infomercials, the reason why that Kevin Trudeau and others are in trouble with the law is they make claims that they can't back up. And they know they are when they start to do the infomercials. In fact, they know that the clock is ticking the second they start the infomercial, because they know that they're going to say things, ridiculous things, that they're not going to be able to back up. And at some point, someone's going to come along and they're going to yank the infomercial off the air. In the meantime, they're going to make tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, if that's what you're saying you do for a living and you want to endorse that business model and you think that's good, we will disagree.
He was talking about Dr. Lorraine Day and mentioned cancer doesn't scare me anymore. Mm-hmm. Dr. Lorraine Day could literally talk him under the table in 3 seconds. She's brilliant. She's, God forbid, if someone got shot in the head, she would do the surgery.
Stop right here. Wait. Stop right here. We're talking about Lorraine Day.
Yes.
The Holocaust denier, the rabid anti-Semite.
You're talking about.
We're talking about. Wait. You're talking about a woman who, as a surgeon, she said she had cancer and then she cured herself of it, but it's never been proven. We're talking about her.
How can you say it's never been proven? She was dying. She had a tumor that she was holding in her hand, in the center of her chest.
Candy, I say, if you want to be a fan of Lorraine Day, that's fine. I don't happen to buy the Holocaust denial thing. I don't think that she's a good spokesperson. I don't think that makes her more credible. I think that makes her less credible.
Well, Holocaust
is that
denial, fair? I don't know, but the fact that he was talking about cancer doesn't scare me anymore, her amazing information that she put out there, and the fact that she did cure herself.
Then send her your money. Then send her your money. No one's stopping you from sending her your money. Right? Wait. If anybody who's listening to the sound of our voice wants to send Lorraine Day money, go ahead.
It's not a matter of sending her money, Ian. It's a matter of receiving credible information as credible information.
I don't think any of that. I'll just say this here, and then I'll move on, because this isn't a debate show, and I don't agree that anything we've done trivializes information. Information is available in these books that are routinely sold over these infomercials. The information, it's not about getting the information out. Let's just be very clear about this, Candy. It is not about, I'm going to spend money to put this infomercial on the air so that I can tell people about cancer cures. It's about getting you to send me money so that I can give you this information. So when you say it's about information, I wish it were. You know what? You could start a website. $125 a year. You can put all of that information on a website and everybody could access it for free. But that's not what they do, because that's not their interest. The interest is not just to get the information out. It's to get the information out in as profitable a way to them as possible. Now, if you want to send them your money, send them your money. If you want to be about just getting information out, there's so many ways to do that and save lives. And I hope, Candy, that if you have incredible information about curing cancer, that you're not going to walk around and come up to people who have cancer and say, and I'll tell you what that is, for $100. If you've got a way to save their life, you have a moral obligation to tell them that information. And I just don't believe that that's what this infomercial industry is set up to do. It's about maximizing profits by then later on giving information that in the end they could have gotten somewhere else for free. Now, I hope that your store, I trust that your store in North Vancouver works on better principles than that. How did Jeffrey Dahmer spin to his father, oh, that's just my Asian sex zombie I'm building? How did he get around
that? Well, it wasn't that the father didn't see those. But, like, for example, Dahmer wanted a freezer. He wanted his dad to buy a freezer. And his dad was saying, well, what do you need a big freezer for? Well, when there's a big sale at the supermarket, I like to, go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff because it's cheaper that way. Oh, okay. Right. Well, once when Jeffrey had a head in a box, and when he was living with his grandmother, and his grandmother was complaining about smells and strange liquids and things, And the father demanded to see what was in the box, and Jeffrey said, "Oh, well, it's pornography. Let me get rid of it, and then I'll show you the box." So the father lets it go, and the next day, of course, he opens the box. It's empty. It did have a head in it.
Right. That's such an interesting... I've never thought of that defense. Oh, that's just my porn.
Yeah, it's just my porn, yeah.
I can't... I'd show it to you, but you don't want to see my porn.
Exactly.
And that wasn't a red flag to Dad right there?
Here's the thing.
How does that...
Yes, it's a red flag, but he gets an out, and he takes it. It's like you almost sort of know something's wrong. You don't want to see it. You take the out, and only in retrospect do you see the impact of what it was. That's what many family members do with a lot of things. A lot of mental illnesses, they reinterpret so it's not, they just don't want it to be as bad as it might be.
Yeah, I get that. I guess that by comparison, then, a hat box full of porn doesn't seem so bad.
Exactly.
I guess
if you're a little weird, there's an odd smell coming out of that box, and
right.
You just really don't know if you want to see it. And he says, well, just, let me just get rid of this porn, and then I'll show you the box.
That's my old stinky porn.
Exactly. I don't want to see that. Do you? With that kind of smell?
I've just never heard of that before. I've just never heard of porn that gives off an odor. I've just never heard
of it. Well, I bet there is some out there.
I don't want to know. There's probably some website, some guys scratching on their screens of their computers as we speak.
Well, one of our famous serial killers was actually Joan of Arc's second in command, confidant. He loved being in battle with her, and then when all the fighting stopped, he was the richest man in France. Gilles de Rais was his name. And when the fighting stopped, he didn't want to stop, and he began killing children in alchemical experiments, and then he started killing them as part of his dinner parties.
I'm not sure. I don't. Did I hear you say dinner party?
Yes.
Okay, so he would have people over, and then he would kill somebody there as part of the entertainment?
That's right.
Okay, and that's how did they turn him in right away for that?
No, they didn't turn him in until he started depleting the family funds. Then they turned him in.
Okay, I'm very confused. I'm fascinated, but I'm very confused by this. So how many dinner parties did he have?
Lots. He confessed to about 140 murders.
Okay, where he would invite people over, and then he would kill somebody at the dinner party.
He was an aristocrat. You couldn't stop aristocrats. He was the richest man in France. He had castle upon castle. He had more money than the king.
Wouldn't there be enough of a reputation about that to not go to any of those parties? Or
no, I think people enjoyed it.
Really?
This was the mood of the times. It was France in the 16th century, 16th century, and he was a valiant warrior, so people didn't question him.
He would use the lower classes? He'd take some poor person and kill them? And
he would send out his servants to families telling, and he'd see a little kid that he was attracted to, and he'd tell his servants to go out and find, tell the families this child will obviously have greater advantages being raised in the castle. They were poor. They were, willing to have that happen, and the kids disappeared.
And that was it?
Mm-hmm.
And he only got turned in when he ran out of money?
Yeah, he got turned in by his relatives when he started depleting the family vaults.
Okay, that's a fascinating story. I don't know why I've never heard that before.
Not a lot of people know it, but that is an example of somebody who was a warrior and loved the killing, and then, turned it into something else.
Is there a history of military service that also maybe runs as a thread through the life of serial killers? Not that anybody who goes into, I'm not saying anything about people going into the military becoming killers, but I would think that would be that's where you go and run and hide in plain sight. If it were wartime, especially if it were,
I think it could bring something out of a person who might have that latently in them. I think the ability to just kill without anybody, holding you accountable for it, and then experiencing it and knowing if you like it or not would certainly make the conditions possible. We had another serial killer from Rochester, New York, Arthur Shawcross, who claimed that when he was in Vietnam that's where he learned to kill, and then when he got back, he just kept killing. It was a lie, but that's what he said.
That's what he said.
Because he had killed children before he went there.
Ugh. So then What's the smallest category? You had mentioned before, and you talked about how there's 13 different categories. Did we get to all of them in your
the
list?
last one is 1% is when we discover people who are serial killers after they've died.
Oh,
because
gosh.
we go to their houses and find the remains of people.
How often does that happen?
I have that at 1%. It wasn't very often. I think I only had 4.
Are there good examples of that, though? I'm sorry, you said 1%, but I mean, do we know of other? I mean, like, who's the most famous example of that where we found out after they died that they'd been a serial killer?
Well, let's see. I don't think there's any really famous ones.
Okay.
I don't think the ones I would tell you would even recognize.
Okay.
Like there was a ranch in Montana where when the guy was removed from the home because he was mentally unstable, they found the bodies of 12 people in his basement.
And what is that's different than the story of the ranch? Was it in California where they...
Yeah, Juan Corona. There were two orchards where 25 men were dug up, itinerant workers.
Yeah, and then was that the one where he had an assistant or an accomplice? Because that's interesting. Occasionally where a serial killer will have an apprentice or...
more like 15% of the time, yeah.
Really?
Not that occasional.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Or like who would be the best examples of that? Where
the best examples are one of the most notorious cases in Canada was Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, who were a married couple. She actually murdered her sister in the process of trying to put horse medication in her to give her. She was 15, to give her to Paul as a Christmas present, a virgin. She wanted him to have her, and in the process they ended up killing her. And then they tortured and murdered 2 young girls together on video. So that was we have a lot of couples, male and female, but we also have threesomes. I told you about the Chicago Rippers.
Right.
So we have a number of team killers.
Of team serial killers.
Yeah.
How do they find each other? I mean, you would think...
Sometimes in prison.
Really?
Yeah, sometimes one will create the other into a killer because the kind of personality disorder the other one has is, he's weak, he might be eccentric or superstitious, they're easy to manipulate, the other one's stronger. Sometimes it's when 2 psychopaths meet, they both have the same fantasies, so they put it into motion. There's a number of different... It's diverse, again, but it is about 15% of serial killers. Did
John Wayne Gacy ever have any help?
Well, he said a few times that some of the people who worked for him, and then, as you know, I told you one of the subcontractors ended up being part of the
Right.
Chicago Rippers crew, but I don't think Gacy... I think he worked alone. He would go pick up these young men and bring them back to his house. I do think he worked alone.
I wanted to tell you a story that happened to me. I'm 48 now, in Hawaii, and it's a question I have for many people involved, either writers or people involved in a cult that I have a question about. But I'll tell you a story. I was about 17, get picked up by my dad in Hawaii, and he was driving, and the passenger happened to be a good friend and a police officer in the state of Hawaii, and he was the head of CID for one of the islands.
Okay.
And we were having a conversation, just sitting back. I wasn't necessarily a conversation. He was talking to my dad. But he kind of looked over and said, "Hey, you see that guy?" And my dad said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, that guy's a Charles Manson follower." My dad goes, "Come on, what do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, we got contacted by L.A. that they're in Hawaii."
Wait, what year is this?
Probably between 87 and 88. I was in high school. I was definitely not a sophomore. I was probably a junior, senior.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And so I thought I looked over and recognized somebody that used to walk around our school. And back in those days in Hawaii, I mean, even today, you could walk on campus. But
sure.
I was kind of taken back by that, and I understood that he meant there were more than one in Hawaii. And it's a peculiar story. It's something that's stuck with me for a long time. I'm in law enforcement myself. And the question I always have is, people talk about the 60s, the 70s, 80s and 90s and Manson being in jail, they never talk about the after effect after Spawn Ranch and the trial with Bela Lugosi and Manson. And it's a question I think it's important is how far does the Manson family go? You know, I'm sitting there at 17, and L.A. had the wherewithal to call Hawaii and let them know that there were followers. And I don't ever think that they were dangerous or they were doing anything wrong, but it just kind of peculiar, and I wanted to share that story with the rest of the world.
Let me reflect on that out of ignorance for that particular situation, but familiarity with another that parallels it. And I would say, I wonder whether, when the comment was made, that he wasn't pointing out somebody who was what we would call, say, a proto-family member, but what would be termed a deutero Manson follower. So Manson, while he's in prison, picks up a whole new following. And they are not people who had experienced him personally, right, like Diane Lake and the people that were around him. That was actually a relatively small group that lived there, and there were some that came and went, and Diane talks about it in the book. There might be somebody who comes for 2 weeks and then sneaks out in the middle of the night and goes, this is not for me. And there were, of course, there were many victims of Manson that we'll never know how many people were killed, but it would still be a relatively contained number. But the reaction to his fame and to the book, it's a lot like what happens with a lot of other serial or spree or mass killers, where they develop a cult following. And I wonder whether that's what he's referring to as somebody who had become a deutero, a secondary cult follower to Manson, based on his popularity as a media figure, as a cultural icon. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I wasn't that involved. I was 17. I knew about Charles Manson. This was the 80s.
Right.
And, you know, you very well could be right, because I never got in, the individual involved that was head of CID has since passed away. And so we'll never know how involved that was. And also, if it was a current investigation or something that was part of the police department, he never would have told me beyond that anyway.
Well, and part of it, too, just to make the point, there weren't that many guys. That's the thing about the Mets. I mean, and most of them can be accounted for. So maybe it was one of the guys who came and went in the group, but, you know, Bobby Beausoleil gets murdered. Right. You know, Tex, Hinman. I mean, it's a short list of guys who were involved. It could have been one of the ranch hands, maybe, because those were a bunch of guys who were kind of anonymous a little bit. But, yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I would say, because I know people that were involved in the I don't agree with them, but I knew one personally that was involved in the Gacy cult, in the John Wayne Gacy cult, and they considered him a kind of guru behind prison, and they found ways to get messages from him and to him, and it was all very sick.
How far does the cult go? Because you seem like you know more about it than I do, but that would be a question for Miss Lake. Does she get threats because she was with the prosecution, right?
Yeah, she was very protected. That's actually in the book, and there was obviously a big backlash toward her. And then she gets married. She doesn't go by Lake anymore. Obviously, she's married. She has kids. She moves into anonymity. I was reading online about her a little bit after I'd finished the book, and I just went back in to sort of see what people say. It's really compelling to think, even with these Manson family wikis, you know, these sites dedicated to all aspects of Manson mania or whatever, how much of that they get wrong about Diane Lake. And the book has already been out for 2 years, and they still don't correct things that they say about her that are completely in error. So maybe there's just not as many people involved, period, and nobody really cares.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that's always possible. Would that be nice? But a really interesting story. I appreciate that, Dave. And so what do you now? You work in law enforcement, you say?
I do. I won't say where or with who, but yeah, I do.
Narcissism is at the core of any killer. If you believe you have the right to end somebody else's life, in that context, that's an extreme version of narcissism.
Well, that is, yeah. if you think you're more important, but here's the thing: psychopaths do not process emotional material the way most of us do, so they don't see other people as actual human beings, as equal to them. Okay, so right off the bat, you have that. They have that, I guess, disadvantage you would call it. So if you don't see someone as equal to you and being human and having, and caring, and you don't feel things very deeply, it doesn't necessarily become narcissism to use them as pawns in your game to entertain yourself or enrich yourself or, whatever it is you're trying to do. It isn't as if you feel like you are killing a human being. All right, so that's one thing. Now, also the heart of psychopathy is narcissism, where it's all about them. They do what they do without remorse. They don't care who they hurt as long as they get what they need to their own advantage. So that's what they're out for. That's all they care about. And in part, that's because they do not develop strong associations with other people and don't see other people as anything but, things that they can do with as they will.
And can you describe the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath?
Well, they're the same thing, but some people use the term sociopath. Now, a sociopath, in the way I understand it, is somebody like, like the mafia, who have their own set of codes. They don't really care what society decides is right and wrong. They only care within their community what's right and wrong. So they will still have loyalties and feelings, and they will be angry and indignant and all of that about right and wrong within their own community. Will have remorse about hurting their children or something like that. Will not care who they hurt outside their community. So that's sociopathic.
Kind of honor among thieves.
Yeah, as psychopath doesn't care about anybody but themselves. They have no remorse about anything, and will even turn on their own husbands, their wives, their children to save themselves if need be. So that's a little bit different. Now, some people nevertheless use the term sociopath when they really mean psychopath. It's very difficult to talk about because it's kind of political, and we don't actually have the diagnosis psychopathy in our country. We have it in a lot of other places in the world, particularly Canada, but not in the United States.
Well, I just want to go on the record and say that I care very deeply about all other human beings, and I never see them as less than a human being unless I'm driving. And I just want to say, unless I'm driving, then suddenly, I don't know what comes over me sometimes. So
that's good. All right, yeah.
It's unfortunately true. I'm confessing to something that should keep me out of the clergy.
Last night you had a guy on, he has a website, Lennon Prophecies.
That was the first hour guest last night, yes.
I have a totally different view of John Lennon. I think, given all of his, the miracles he performed, you might say, writing all those songs in 5 or 10 years, and his likeness to the Shroud of Turin, he could have been the second coming for all we know. But the real reason...
I don't know about that. But I will say this, and I thought this was fair to point out, and I didn't want to get into it too much because I was afraid it was going to really blow the guy's book apart. This was the book last night, The Lennon Prophecy, and it was based on the belief that John Lennon sold his soul to the devil in 1960, and that the devil took his soul back in 1980 by having him assassinated. And he was using the lyrics of John Lennon to make this case. And I just want to, and I'll let you get back to your thought on that, Steve, in a second. There's a really interesting story about how John Lennon was watching a lot of televangelists. He was watching actually Billy Graham on TV a lot when they were in the Dakota. And he was leaning very much to making sort of an evangelical faith claim. And Yoko Ono was absolutely put her foot down. And she had, I think, a disproportionate amount of control over him. But according to the story, it said that she was really flippant. And that John was vocal about this conflict that was going on between them, and that he was really very interested in becoming essentially a born-again Christian. So I throw that out to you. I didn't get into it too deeply last night, but it's a very interesting story, and I don't know that it backs up this idea that somehow he'd sold his soul to the devil. But so, Steve, where would you want to make another point on that?
Yes. There's another website, LennonMurderTruth.com.
Uh-huh.
And it shows that Nixon and Reagan let author Stephen King pull the trigger, and that Chapman's a lookalike decoy. Have you ever seen that?
Okay, no, and I don't know how for a second you could say this was Stephen King.
Well, he's the one getting the autograph.
Stephen King.
Yes.
No.
Advertised one great big Zippo lighter, which is what he looks like 3 months later when he pulls the trigger at night.
All right, well, Steve, I think you kind of lost me on some of your imagery, but gosh, I'll try and follow up on that website.
Just moved down to Grapevine, Texas. I had just gotten my driver's license, and a friend of mine who had moved from Alaska was in Fort Worth, so I decided to take a little road trip one Saturday evening. And my mom had gotten out of town, so I was able to borrow her brand new car since I had not driven long enough to get my own car. So I'm in my mom's car. I drive to Fort Worth. I'm at this friend of mine's house, and this party next door spills over. So being neighborly, we all decided to kind of, partake in what they were doing. And from just talking to people, I suddenly came upon a lady by the name of Clarity. And I found her very fascinating, and it was just that the one thing I noticed, though, is we had just gotten to the party, and she was very insistent on leaving. And I had just met her. She seemed like a really great girl, and yet, it's like one of those fleeting moments where you're thinking, you just had the door open, but yet now she's closing the door. And then she tells me she'd been abandoned by her friends and she needed a ride home. So, well, Mama raised me right, so I decided to be chivalrous. And, and at this point, I'm 18. I'd never been with a woman in my life. So I'm thinking, any girl that's willing to get in my car, I'm willing to drive you to China if you need me. So I said, no problem. She goes, well, I live in Denton, Texas, which is just north of Grapevine. So we're on the highway, sir, and I've just been driving for a few weeks now, and I'm really not sure where I'm going, but I'm following her direction. And sir, the most amazing thing happened. I realized that all the city lights of the Fort Worth and the Metroplex had dissipated as our conversation had become very engrossing. The greatest hits of the Eagles are playing on the tape deck. And as the Long Way Home song is playing, I suddenly realized that I'm not seeing signs for anything relating to Dallas and Fort Worth. And there is no turnoffs, there is no nothing. And it was so surreal because it felt like one of those kind of Quentin Tarantino movies where it's like kind of smoke going by you. There's no exits, there's no nothing. You're just trapped in this. It's like a lost highway. And I remember at one point I'm getting really nervous because I'm thinking I have no idea where I'm going. And suddenly I see a sign that says Oklahoma 35 miles. And I'm going, that can't be good. So she goes, oh, hold on. She goes, take a right. So I'm thinking, oh, thank God Almighty, she knows where she's going. So we're suddenly in Denton, Texas. I'm happy. I'm awake. I'm good. I'm ready to drop her off. She goes, well, let's just make one stop. I'm like, okay. At this point, I'm still pretty gullible. So we go to an apartment complex, and there's a hill right by the parking lot. And she goes, well, we just need to go over the hill, and I want to show you something. And she's very, she's very persistent. It's just all about, I felt like she was on a mission. Okay. So I decided to go with her. So we go over this hill, and I suddenly come upon this stone gate, and a huge, huge stone gate, but there was a part of it that had been knocked down, and it looked like something very big had hit it. So I just kind of took note of that, and as we walked through, it's July summer evening, still, extremely still. I mean, there's no wind, no nothing. I mean, you could literally hear, silence has a sound, and that was the sound I was hearing. And I'm following her through this graveyard, and I'm not one of those people, sir, that, like, hey, let's go to the graveyard to have a good time. But at this point, I'm willing to try anything, for the first time. So she takes me into the graveyard, and we're looking around, and I'm stopping. I'm kind of looking around, and I notice there's a full moon out. And the moon is so bright, it's almost hypnotic. And I'm looking at this moon, sir, and from out of nowhere, 7 white birds just suddenly, it was almost like they kind of like collectively formed a little flying V. But what was so amazing was it was so quiet, I could actually hear their wings rustle, but it wasn't in a flittering moment. It was almost in like a harmonic moment, like they're all in such unity. And I'm sitting there going, I'm looking at the full moon, I'm looking at these 7 brilliantly white birds in the darkest of dark of nights in Texas. And I'm thinking, this is really amazing, right? And suddenly from behind me, I hear her quoting some type of prophecy about the 7 white birds and about the returning of the girl, the angel, home. And I'm getting like this chill like you wouldn't believe, sir, as I'm looking at the moon, I'm looking at the birds, and she's doing this prophecy thing behind me, and it's all coming together. And at the moment she says, come home, I just turned around, and all I see is this whiff of smoke, almost like that look of, like, because I live in Alaska, and I remember, when it's cold, you can see your breath. It was like that, sir, but it was 80 degrees, and it was almost cold as it hits my cheek, and I'm standing there in the middle of the graveyard in Denton, Texas, and she's gone. And except for a whiff of smoke. So I'm screaming the name. I'm screaming for clarity in a graveyard in Texas in the middle of the night, trying to figure out what's going on. So after about a half an hour of looking around, there's a gas station right down the street. So I decided to amble my way down there, get some gas for the road trip home, and I must have looked shooken up because the guy goes, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, you won't believe what just happened." And I tell him the story, and he looks at me, he goes, "Son," he goes, "you're the third one that's happened to me." He goes, I've been working the night shift now for 7 years. I said, "Let me tell you a little story about clarity." And I'm like, my knees in fact, my knees are wobbling as I speak about this. He starts to tell about this. It was a prom night, I guess, back in sometime in the 70s, but a group of teenagers were driving in this apartment complex, had hit the hill, gone over the hill, and with this big old, this pickup truck, it hit that stone gate that I noticed that had been knocked down and wound up killing everyone in the truck, including the driver, a young lady who was graduating that night at the prom named Clarity. Turns out, he's like going, "Well, you're not the first one that's returned Clarity home." So at this point, I'm thinking, but here's the part where Coast to Coast comes in hand. One ghostly night, I call into Art Bell, and I tell him the ghost story of Clarity. And, sir, I'm standing in Grapevine, Texas, and it's another still Texas night. There's not a cloud in the sky. It's 2 a.m. I'm telling about Clarity to Art, and I hang it. At the moment I tell the story and I say, "Go home," you guys clicked off. There was a burst of lightning that hits a transformer right across the street. In the burst of lightning, sir, the moment your phone clicked off, that lightning hits the transformer, lights up my room brilliantly. I turn around and I see 5 people standing in my room. And I'm alone. So I'm like, and it was the most amazing thing it was like 5 women of all various ages. It looked like a family, but it wasn't our time period. It was like sometimes like 100 years ago.
Okay.
And they were standing there very calm, and the light of the transformer is just for a moment. I see them clear as day. And sir, I wasn't frightened. I wasn't scared. It was like acceptance because I'd seen them before. Just a week before that, I'd nearly gotten into a catastrophic accident as I'm driving the highways of Dallas-Fort Worth, and I remember these people running around my car, making sure my car was safe. And those very same people showed up that night when I hung up the phone with Coast to Coast. So you never know what can happen when you call Coast to Coast.
Very good. Well, then, and I'll be curious to see what happens as this multi-chaptered story of yours continues this time next year, then. And we'll hear the update of what happened when you told the update of what happened on Ghost to Ghost.